Well, we have arrived in 2025, and we are recording this just a day before President-elect Trump is scheduled for sentencing. Quick reminder, why is he being sentenced? Oh, right. That's because he was found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in an attempt to hide a, quote, hush money payment to porn actor Stormy Daniels during the last weeks of his first campaign in 2016. The payout was made to keep her from publicizing claims she'd had sex with a married Trump years earlier. And that's according to the AP News. For the record, in case you had any questions about this, lying on your business records is illegal. But the judge, despite this being illegal, has already said he probably won't put Trump in jail and instead may give him, quote, unconditional discharge in which a conviction stands, but the case is closed without jail time, a fine, or probation, end quote. And so basically, that means he won't have any consequences for his illegal actions. Slightly mind-boggling. But assuming he is inaugurated, this means Trump will be the first president to take office convicted of felony crimes. And we can't help but wonder then, since we do know, right, after so much research, that an organization's tone is often set by its leadership. So how will we see Trump's leadership play out in our collective futures in the United States? How is it going to impact the culture of the United States?
That's such an important point, because let's be real about where we are in this moment in history, courtesy of The Atlantic. According to a report last year by the Varieties of Democracy Institute at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, when it comes to global freedom, we have returned to a level last seen in 1986. About 5.7 billion people, which is 72% of the world's population, now live under authoritarian rule. Even the United States, which is, held out as this beacon of democracy, is about to inaugurate a president who openly boasts of wanting to be a, quote, dictator on day one, who regularly threatens to jail his opponents and sic the military on the, quote, enemy within, and who jokes about his election being the country's last. Many Americans understand today what political exhaustion and complacency look and feel like. But the dissident is the one who hopes against hope.
We cannot imagine that it'll be particularly easy, but we do believe we have reason to hope. And in our minds, hope is the consequence of action, right? A dissident takes action, and it's often self-fulfilling, right? We act, we hope, we act some more. And that's why today we're asking you this. How are you Trump-proofing your life? Welcome to the Dear White Women podcast, the show that helps white women use their privilege to uproot systemic racism without centering themselves in the process. We are your multi-ethnic best friends, Sara and me, Sasha. All right. Are we ready to jump into what we're doing to Trump-proof our life? Because I think first things first, you've got to protect yourself. And as a pilot's wife, me, I'll be the first to say that when facing times of trouble, you need to secure your own oxygen mask before helping those around you. I hope you didn't roll your eyes too hard at the total cliche phrase that I used. But what do we mean by that? Because to be honest, I have to work really hard to maintain my mental health at the best of times. And I think what we mean by this is, like, while I probably, like most everyone out there, knows that you're supposed to exercise, eat real food, drink caffeine and alcohol in moderation or not at all, sleep 8 hours a night, see friends, get hugs, right? Sometimes I feel like I can get in my head and say, I'm too busy, or I don't want to sweat. I don't want to do the hard thing. But last year, which was one of the most difficult years of my life, I'm just going to take you on a behind the scenes tour because my stress hit a total fever pitch, and out of absolutely nowhere, I got hit with a thunderclap headache. I have no idea if you know what those are. It was within like 1 second, my skull felt like it was being crushed in a vice grip, and that my brain was going to pop like a grape. And then within a few minutes, the whole thing went away. Like everything subsided. And so being stubborn, I didn't do anything different until it happened again. And then I was sent to the ER for various CT scans to make sure my brain wasn't bleeding. I'm like, what? My brain could be bleeding? Ultimately, the neurologist and everybody told me that my brain looked fine, but that this was a type of migraine that comes from extreme stress and too much adrenaline. And they told me I needed to do less. I literally started laughing. Like, who can do less in this environment? Like, you've got to be kidding me. I can't do less. But as it sank in, I realized, I mean, it's not like I'm an adrenaline junkie who's jumping out of airplanes or riding on roller coasters every day, right? Like, something in my day to day choices, in my day to day life was giving me too much adrenaline, too much stress. And so, if you're going to listen to anyone, it may as well be an expert like a neurologist who's basically saying you need to do something different for things to change. So, you have to take care of yourself first. And if you're able to put a roof over your head and food on the table and pay for your basics, take a moment to make sure you're not chasing busy work for the sake of buying into the systems, right? And prioritize your well-being. Misasha, you told me this as well, where you were like, stop doing the small things, stop chasing the small stuff, focus on the big picture. I also laughed at you, but then I really listened. And like,
I'm glad we're being super honest here, by the way.
but I slowed down. Like, I realized again, this applies in the big picture. Nothing is going to change unless we do something different. So I did. I slowed down. I reprioritized work. I made sure I was seeing and talking to friends every week. I put exercise back into my regular rotation. I even reduced chocolate, which I always keep at my desk and was like my 2 o'clock pick me up, because who the hell knew that chocolate produces adrenaline in your body and can spur on freaking migraines? I learned something new. And then I kept up with my water and my sleep, and I'm feeling a lot better, a lot more stable. And so I guess that's why I'm saying the baseline care that we give ourselves on a daily basis matters. Consider this your sign, your permission to prioritize your well-being first.
I love that you shared this story and the sort of behind the scenes look, because I think that that's a really important message that often is the hardest to hear, right? But one that we need to internalize. And what I also hear from that message is, or your story rather, is like, control what you can control, right? Because I think it's so easy when we think about, we started with sort of these big concepts of like authoritarian rule and stuff like that. Like, when you get caught up in the really huge things that we can't necessarily control by ourselves, like it seems impossible or overwhelming, and you get stuck in this state of paralysis, for lack of a better word, or inability to do anything. And I was reminded of this recently because, as we're recording this, LA, a large portion of LA is on fire. And for those of you who don't know, like, my full backstory, I grew up in Pasadena, have lived in Pasadena as an adult. All of my immediate family is still in Los Angeles County. And so we were both incredibly lucky and not so lucky with regard to the wildfires that are burning. Yet we are most lucky because all of us are safe. And I know that not everyone can say that. So I think when you think about something like this, like something like a wildfire, right? Like, that is something that none of us can control. But what we can control is how we can move ourselves, right? How we can prioritize certain things in our lives. Like, what is important on the daily versus, and what do we have a hand in changing about ourselves? Because Sara, what you were talking about, like making those changes in your life, right, to prioritize your well-being, those are things we can control. And I love that. I think a lot of this episode, we're going to be talking about what can you control, right? In a world where a lot of things may seem completely out of control.
I like that. It reminds me with some gratitude of a message we got from a listener. Angie, thank you for your feedback. But, Angie was saying that she felt pretty overwhelmed at the notion of what is to come in 2025 and beyond. And that this idea of really focusing on local things, doing what you can do to make a difference in your communities, really thinking about that smaller difference we can make on a day-to-day basis matters, and it changes the energy we potentially might have to continue doing it on a longer term basis. So yeah, anyway, it ties into that too.
Well, I think that's really important. And I think, as we think about 2025, right? And I want to take us on a quick sidebar that's come up fairly regularly, about stuff that's come up fairly regularly in conversations we've been a part of, right? And I think, Sara, you and I both like consuming information, I would say, and that's probably a huge understatement. But the real question is, and I think we know this from the prior Trump presidency, right? How do you stay informed while keeping your sanity? Because I will tell you that the sound of Trump's voice is like an actual trigger for me. I hear it, I'm immediately back in some, I don't know, doom spiral. So let's talk about some suggestions that we have, some tips that have worked for us. And hopefully, as you're listening to this, maybe some of these you'll incorporate, or maybe you've got some different ones and we'd love to hear those. So let's start with picking your relatively unbiased news source, because we know that's extremely tricky right now, and stick with reading those, right? Which for us, some of those that come up are like NPR, right? Or AP News or Reuters, right? And if you're thinking about, sort of, Sarah, back to your point about community and local community, right? What impacts us most is really our local news and centered in our communities. So continuing to keep up what's happening in your immediate area is probably like the most important in those daily, your daily existence and that of your family as well.
Totally. I guess the second one, right? And I'm a huge fan of this idea of putting screen time and app limits on your phone so you can only doom scroll for so long. Because I think back to the days when I was growing up and my dad would take in the news, like picture an older man with the newspaper on their, like, covering their faces. Like there was a designated time and a place for you to take in information. And then maybe you'd watch the news after dinner or something. Like it was very set. We now have these mini computers that we haul around all the time and we're getting information overload. And it affects our psychology. And so I am not sponsored by Brick, but I do want to say that there is this app that I found that has been really incredibly helpful. It's called Brick, and it literally is a magnetic tiny brick that I stick on my refrigerator. I downloaded the app on my phone and I have programmed it so when I activate the app, it turns off all of the apps that I want it to turn off. So it gets rid of any social media, news feeds, whatever. Only allows me to have I've programmed it so it only lets me use my calling phone, my texting, and then the internet if I need to go look up something. Calculators, like basic functionality, but it turns my phone into like a basic phone until I go back and literally physically tap it on the brick on my refrigerator again to release it. Introducing that little bit of friction to get you out of this reflexive habit of picking up your phone and doom scrolling is super duper helpful.
I love that. I didn't realize that there was a physical brick, by the way, that you actually have. Okay, that adds a new level to this because I feel like it's like you have a flip phone now, pretty much, or a slightly, technologically advanced flip phone. And I want to just add, not that this is like a I told you so moment or like validated all of my gut feelings about social media, but I think we're all seeing that sort of it's like the Wizard of Oz moment, right? Like the curtain is coming back on what social media really is, especially with Meta's announcements about how they're not going to really be having those like content checking anymore, which, Sarah, as you pointed out, makes it a whole lot more like Wikipedia, where anyone can just kind of put up something and call it true, right? And I guess we are in the world of alternate facts now. But also the fact that you may be who you're seeing on your IG reels or feeds or anything like that may not be people at all, right? Those could be totally created personalities designed to interact with you in ways that, like, that's not what we're looking for. So this may be a great time to really rethink your relationship with social media, especially as we're not going to be able to count on it to have sort of this ability to tell us the truth, right? It will tell us things, but those things like may be really detrimental in the end.
Especially for, I think it's a fairly large population of the adults in the United States get their news from TikTok and other social media sources. You should be very, very wary of this if that's the case. And unfollow news. Like I've been unfollowing so many accounts that are just served up to me. And we took our Dear White Women podcast stuff off. I mean, I didn't close it because I want to keep the handle, but we're never checking it. It's done. We are done with Facebook on Dear White Women and toying with what we're going to do on Instagram now too. So anyway.
I'm laughing because I'm not sure how many times we've had this conversation over the years.
What you're about to say? Yeah. What are you about to say, Misasha?
I'm about to say, stay away from the comments section, right? Because along with how social media might make you feel, the comment section is going to make you feel a way. And it's, generally speaking, not a great one.
No, I will admit that Misasha has talked me down many, 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 many a time because on our various feeds, we get people or trolls who make comments that are inappropriate, and we are like, what do we do about this? Like, yes, their comments don't at this point serve to change people's minds. It will infuriate you, and it should not be part of your self-care regimen to read the comments on news stories or social media. Like, I think going back to your idea of rethinking what we're doing, again, what we're interacting with, stay away from the comment section.
Yes. And going along with that theme, like thinking about what is calming in your life.
Oh, heck yes. Sasha, you said the, sound of Trump's voice. In generally speaking, I don't watch the news or watch videos any of news anymore at all because they tend to get under my skin, whether it's because of the pace of the conversation, whether it's because I can read faster than I can watch these videos, the sound, the something about taking in information in that way drives me nuts. And so I prefer reading. And I've got a few newsletters that I'm subscribed to in addition to like those unbiased news sources that I get my perspectives from.
Yeah. Well, and as you know, and as we do a fair amount, right? Like sometimes there is a purpose for videos, and that's to laugh at the news, right? Because sometimes satire is like, it's the concept of what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. I guess this is like along those lines of like having to laugh through the pain, right? Because otherwise it's either laughing or crying, and laughing's way more fun. So, watching things like John Oliver or The Daily Show or, even a really good short SNL skit may be fun, right? Those are admittedly sort of all left leaning, right? But for me, even sometimes the newsletters that I like have certain clips in there or certain satire that just get you a little bit out of that doom scroll or doom feeling or the anxiety around trying to find news.
Love that. Okay. I love that we were practical, but I want to shift into a few mindset things too about Trump proofing your life because Waging Nonviolence had a great article. And I want to just highlight a few things that I took from this. One is to trust yourself. And I know that sounds I don't even know how that sounds. But if you look at where we are, there's been a lot of trust lost in traditional institutions, right? They've done surveys. They found that people have lost trust in things like Congress, in things like media and big business. We may have even lost trust in some of our families and friends since the COVID era and over politics. But this lack of trust plays right into autocracy because it makes it a lot easier to turn people against each other. And so I think we need to start trusting our own eyes and our gut feeling and being cautious not to fall into the trap of like swallowing other people's stories without question. And on the flip side of that, I think I can't overstate this enough. We also have to be trustworthy with, right? Like you have to be a trustworthy person with how you're showing up in the world, with how you think, with your emotions, with how you treat other people. I think that trust and is very important to start with. The second thing I would say is to grieve. And I think the reason for this is primarily so we don't see what we did over the last 8 years, which is people sort of covering their mouths or holding their cheeks, being like, oh, I can't believe this is happening in this country. It's like, yes, it has been. You're right. You've got to process your emotions. We've got to process the impact of Trump's rhetoric, the impact of the potential policies we'll see on the people we love and on ourselves. So to grieve, get together with someone else or with a group of people from different walks of life and process the emotions so you don't spend the next 4 years in a daze or in some false reality and not having really allowed yourself to feel the impact of this moment.
Those are so important. And I think what goes along with that is, really picking your battles, right? Choose your lane and let go of the rest, because there is simply going to be far too much happening for you to be involved in it all. As Sarah, as you were talking about, your father or like with the newspaper, right? Like that used to be how we got the news. And now we feel like it's constantly coming at you, right? As the article says, there's always something bad happening every day. And you're going to know about it immediately because of like the computer that you've got, in your pocket or in your hand. If we had to react to every bad thing, we never have time to eat. And so like, let that just sink in for a moment. And then ask yourself, what are the issues that are the ones that are like your ride or die issues, right? Like the ones that you're going to like get on that hill for, right? And do something about a lot or a little, or despite, caring about something, maybe that's not something you're really going to want to, do anything about at all. So think about those issues, write them down, review that list and let that be your guide for these next 4 years. I mean, this can be an ever evolving list, right? But at least let that be your guide at the start, because we don't want to be stuck in cycles of only sort of angsting in public, doing things like posting on social media or talking with friends. Or I think sometimes you hear about something, you do it for a day, and then you're like, well, that's it. I'll check that off. That's kind of being symbolic instead of actually making the difference that you probably want to make.
Yeah. And I want to bring that down also to like going back to how we started, which is how is it impacting our lives, and being really practical, because these aren't necessarily just esoteric issues that philosophically you care about. Like, what are you willing to do to protect your own life and the lives of those around you? For example, however you feel about this is an example. Like, until there's a federal ban, there are still states that allow access to abortion. Would you move to a state to give yourself or your children options? Or if you care about making sure that your kids have access to real history, would you be willing to facilitate a book drive to make sure public schools and public libraries have access to books that may be banned in other areas? Would you join forces with those protecting the librarians and teachers and stand up for them if, people talking about, quote, parental rights starts cropping up in your area? Maybe you lay the groundwork now by showing respect and deference to teachers, standing up for all kids by showing up to support LGBTQIA children, Black and brown children, neurodivergent children, special education programs, and more, right? So that they're all getting what legally they ought to in the way of equal access to a broad education and representation. Would you even consider running for school board yourself? Like, again, like we said, think locally, think community, look around at what you can do and want to do and are willing to do in your real life that would make a difference in your neighborhood, and hold the boundaries against the onslaught that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that last point about community is so important, because I think that, before there's, let's say, a federal abortion ban, like, you're going to see the bans happen locally, right? You see the bans happen on a state level. You're seeing it's, as much as we have groundroots activism, there's also the same activism coming to restrict our rights on a local level. So if this is an issue that you care about, I'm not saying abortion specifically, but if there is an issue in your community that you care about, look and see how it's changing or how it's evolving, or what that stance is in your community. Because when you make a difference there, you're actually making a difference on a much larger level in the end. So I think also we have to get very real about power. And, quoting this article, Gene Sharp wrote, "By themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services to the ruler through a variety of organizations and institutions. If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule. For example, in response to Trump's 2019 government shutdown, flight attendants prepared a national strike. Such a strike would ground planes across the country and a key transportation network. Within hours of announcing they were mobilizing immediately for a strike, Trump capitulated. Power will need to emerge from folks no longer obeying the current unjust system. This tipping point of mass non-cooperation will be messy. It means convincing a lot of people to take huge personal risks for a better option." And when I hear this, I think about the Birmingham bus boycotts, right? Or you're thinking Montgomery bus boycotts, where you're thinking about a sustained effort over time of people giving up things or challenging what we can't do, even through a number of executive actions, right? Like, Trump is not going to be able to do and affect these changes or these sweeping sort of things, because there are things he just can't do by himself.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where the rubber meets the road. Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to give up some ease and make things perhaps a little bit more difficult in order to stand up for what's right? Like, going back to the example you said earlier, like, for example, would you take yourself off Facebook and Instagram, or commit to using it differently so they don't make money off your eyeballs? Because that, like, the eyeballs is what makes them money, and we want to hit them where it hurts because they listen to money, in order to protest their decision to stop fact checking and allow untruths to stand on their platform. You and I did this, Misasha. We took our podcast off Spotify, even though that was the second highest source of listeners for this show, when Spotify decided to allow lies about COVID and more to stand on some of their sponsored shows, right? Like there was untruths coming and Spotify made a decision. And so we did as well. And sure, that hurt our listener numbers, but can we adapt and succeed? Yeah. I think it's clear that the pandemic proved to us just how adaptable we all are as individuals and as a society. It's not easy, but we can adapt. And so we can adapt as a society without Meta's platforms if we choose to. So what are you going to choose? I don't mean to make that the issue, but that is an example of it will be inconvenient and you might miss out on stuff. Are you willing to do that? And in what other ways are you going to stand up and cause, as your favorite quote is, like cause good trouble, like Representative John Lewis said?
Yeah, I think it is a mindset shift, right? We have been talking about sort of mindset shifts. And can we collectively think this way?
Yeah. And I think lastly, I want to remind all of us that we do not want to reinvent the wheel, right? There's a lot of organizations doing great work. So when we say pick your lane, think about what you care about and show up with your time, energy, and money to support the organizations that are in that zone, right? Don't forget about pressuring local officials and supporting local organizing. And you can find like local groups about issues that you care about at indivisible.org. Things as potentially like things that you might not have thought about are like bolstering data security, because some organizations are working now on protecting vulnerable data. Like imagine you have your period tracking data out there on an app in this environment, right? And other organizations are implementing kill switches and things in case things really go sideways. So organizations that support work like this are like the Electronic Freedom Foundation. We've talked a lot about local and independent media, NPR, public television, like any of your local newspapers. They are struggling. There's been a vacuum of local reporting. See if you can support that again. And then obviously care-based and individual cause-based organizations like for women's healthcare, If When How, Planned Parenthood, Black Women's Health Imperative, other organizations like Black Lives Matter, the group supporting undocumented immigrants, Mi Gente, LGBTQIA support like at the Human Rights Campaign or the Trevor Project or GLAAD. Join your local union if you can, like your workplace, because that gives workers more power and is the big part of why the middle class was so strong in past generations. Standing Rock stands against big oil, Empower Change, National Domestic Workers Alliance, the ACLU. I mean, there are so many more in a spreadsheet that we have that we'll link to in our show notes here.
I think that list is so important because at least it gives you somewhere to start. And if there are organizations that you feel strongly about too, we'd love to hear about them as well. Ultimately, I was going to say it is what it is, but we are where we are. And, Trump will be president in just a number of days, right? In 2025. This is our reality. We know firsthand, right, how harmful some of the policies he's suggesting can be. But Sara, as you're listing out all of these mindsets and organizations and, we're talking through all of this, that gives us hope, right? Hope that each one of us will do the work to prioritize our own well-being, right? To remember what we can control to make the resistance sustainable. That's hope that each of us will find the people and organizations that give us hope. And that we'll all remember that thoughts and prayers make absolutely no difference in our reality. It's only when we take action that things will change. So here's to having hope as the consequence of all that action we're going to be taking together.
You've just listened to the Dear White Women podcast with your hosts, Sara and me, Sasha. Yes, we're on social media, and yes, you can hire us to do talks about our book, but the biggest thing, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to receive our free materials. Head over to dearwhitewomen.com to get on the list.